Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're jumping straight into a topic that has fundamentally reshaped the global landscape: China's incredible transformation. Specifically, its drive towards becoming an innovation powerhouse.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and you've brought us a really rich set of sources today.
We'll be pulling insights from an economist's view on the big picture drivers, some academic research drilling down into specific policy impacts.
And also a personal account, offering those sort of ground-level perspectives from someone deeply involved in leadership and cross-cultural exchange.
Exactly. So our sources include perspectives from Qiyu Jin on the economic forces, Feng Zhan's academic research on policy effects on R&D.
And those valuable insights from Oliver Werner Neitinger, sharing lessons from his work across leadership, communication, and, cultural understanding.
Okay, so let's unpack this stack. Our mission for this deep dive is really to cut through the noise, extract the core insights. We want to understand the different phases of China's journey, right?
Right, and the forces driving it, the mix of state strategy, market dynamics.
And the human elements, too. Leadership, culture, even how social progress kind of fits into this bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And why should you care? Well, grasping how China's innovation engine works gives you, I think, a much clearer lens on global economic trends, market shifts, and what might be coming next. So let's dive in.
Okay.
So for a long time, the dominant global image of China was really the world's factory. Massive manufacturing, often seen as relying heavily on copying, imitation.
And the sources do confirm that perception, it had roots in reality. There absolutely was this imitator phase. But the personal perspective source, interestingly, frames this not really as a failing.
More like a necessary step.
Exactly, a necessary developmental stage. Think of it like a foundation period.
Learning.
Like building industrial muscle. Absorbing knowledge, mastering processes, building the actual infrastructure and capacity.
Precisely. It laid essential groundwork. But, the economist's view points out that this phase, while crucial at first, eventually hit diminishing returns.
Yeah. By the 1990s, early 2000s, just imitating wasn't the most profitable way forward anymore.
And that pressure, mixed with deliberate intent, seems to be the pivot point. The ambition changes dramatically. We see these top-level declarations. Didn't the academic source mention Xi Jinping's push?
Yeah, aiming for China to be a leading global innovator by 2030. And innovation wasn't just a buzzword. It became like a core directive.
The academic source highlights how figures like Premier Li Keqiang really made it a central theme in key reports, signaling its importance across the board.
Right, not just for academics or tech firms, but for the whole system.
So this transformation, it clearly wasn't accidental. What were the actual forces driving it? The sources point to this really fascinating interplay, don't they, between market dynamics and state strategy.
Yeah, on the market side, you've got those classic economic pressures, creative destruction.
Innovate or die, basically.
Pretty much. And consumers were getting wealthier, more demanding. They wanted better, more sophisticated products.
And what about that huge domestic market? How does that factor in?
Oh, that's highlighted as a massive, almost unique advantage in one source. I mean, think about it. A vast domestic market lets you test, iterate, scale new products incredibly fast.
You can launch something, get feedback from millions almost instantly, tweak it, and then roll it out nationwide at a pace that's just hard to imagine elsewhere.
Exactly. And here's a really interesting bit. One source points to a kind of surprising driver. Economic backwardness in some areas actually created openings.
That sounds counterintuitive, right?
It does. The example given is the financial sector. Because traditional systems like widespread credit card use weren't as deeply rooted as, say, in the U.S.
They left a gap.
A huge gap, which digital payments just exploded into.
Right. Instead of needing to build out the whole card infrastructure, they kind of leapfrogged directly to mobile payments, QR codes.
On a massive scale.
Yeah.
Partly because that older system wasn't so dominant.
So sometimes not having the legacy system can actually be an advantage for disruption.
It seems so. But beyond market forces, the state's role was, undeniably huge and worked alongside these dynamics.
Setting the direction seems key, like declaring China will be an innovation nation. But how does that translate into action?
Well, it directs resources. Policy. Local governments actively courted tech firms with incentives, cheaper land, funding, tax breaks, often clustering them in these special high-tech zones.
Like to build ecosystem?
Exactly. And then there's the national investment. Huge subsidies flowing into key strategic sectors, semiconductors, IoT. One source mentioned that massive planned stimulus what was it, 1.6 trillion US dollars by 2026.
Wow. For things like 5G, AI infrastructure,
Yeah.
that's a serious commitment of capital.
It really is. And it's not just funding, it's also strategic system building. The sources mentioned this Jugo initiative.
Which means whole nation, right? Like a national mobilization.
Exactly. It's described as this system connecting industries, universities, national labs, the public sector channeling the whole nation's effort towards tech goals. One source even likened its ambition to the U.S. Apollo program.
But across multiple fields aimed at self-reliance and leadership, including planning these huge tech centers and industrial parks.
It sounds incredibly coordinated. And the leadership seems very hands-on.
Definitely. The Politburo reportedly holds regular study sessions specifically on emerging tech trends, big data, AI, blockchain.
They're trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Hmm.
And the 14th five-year plan set those ambitious targets for R&D spending growth, over 7% annually on average.
The academic source really tries to pin down the effect of these policies, doesn't it? Looking at that specific government policy change after 2008, they call it a quasi-natural experiment.
Yes, that term basically means something happened, a policy shift that researchers didn't design, but it acted like an experiment in the real world. It let them compare firms after the change to how they might have been otherwise, or to similar firms elsewhere.
Right, helps isolate the cause and effect a bit better.
Exactly.
So what did this experiment find?
Well, the key takeaway highlighted is that this policy change and related things like the 2009 patent law updates had a noticeable positive effect on a firm's research intensity.
Which is R&D spending relative to their total assets.
That's right. And research intensity is seen as an input measure, right? It's about the commitment.
Putting cash on the table now.
Exactly. Rather than waiting for patents or products, which are outputs that take longer to show up.
Okay.
And the study found Chinese firms ramped up this R&D intensity more significantly than a matched group of U.S. firms during that same period. Now, they didn't necessarily overtake the U.S. firms on this measure in the study's time frame.
But it shows the government's push did speed up the catching up process in terms of R&D investment?
Precisely. It accelerated it.
Okay, so policy, funding, strategy, clearly vital. But innovation isn't just about budgets and government plans, is it? It's fundamentally about people.
Absolutely. And that's where the personal perspective source really adds a critical layer. It stresses how innovation is deeply tied to cultivating leaders. The Chinese leadership approach is described as really emphasizing adaptability, resilience, and quite a long-term view qualities you absolutely need to navigate the uncertainty that comes with innovation.
Makes sense. And communication was mentioned too, as evolving.
Yeah, that Chinese companies are getting better at telling their own stories globally, through collaborations, through branding, cultural exchanges.
Which helps shift those global perceptions away from just the old factory image, right?
Yeah.
To show their own innovative chops.
Exactly. And the sources also touch on deeper cultural currents.
Like tapping into China's long history of ingenuity.
Yes, that, but also framed alongside more contemporary cultural shifts. There's this adoption of a growth mindset noted among businesses and leaders, and even leveraging cultural heritage itself as a source of innovation, like in the gaming industry.
Interesting. The academic source also mentioned something about the internal workings of companies, didn't it?
Right. It briefly touched on how corporate governance factors, things like board independence, ownership concentration, how top managers are paid, like performance bonuses. These can influence a firm's decisions on R&D spending.
So even those micro-level structures and incentives matter for the bigger innovation picture.
They do. It shows how human and structural factors are linked all the way down.
Now, shifting perspective slightly, innovation isn't always just tech or business models. One source broadens that definition.
Yeah, the personal perspective source talks about social progress as part of this broader innovation narrative. It includes a discussion of LGBTQ advocacy as an example.
Okay, how is that framed?
It describes it as gradual changes happening, growing awareness and acceptance, especially among younger people, and how this is reflected sometimes in creative industries. It's presented in that source as one example of societal evolution within this larger innovation context.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. Social shifts as a kind of innovation, too. And the video game industry was also given as a concrete example of more traditional innovation.
Oh, definitely. China's become a global powerhouse in game development, esports, companies like Tencent, NetEase. It's a sector that really showcases blending tech skill with cultural elements to create globally popular products.
And finally, the sources point to international collaborations as a sign that China's innovation is gaining global recognition. The personal perspective source mentioned facilitating China-Germany partnerships specifically.
Right. And these collaborations, especially in areas like green tech or digital transformation, they're not just one-off deals. They signal this mutual recognition of innovative strengths.
And a willingness to work together on big global challenges, which sort of cements China's role as an innovation partner on the world stage.
Exactly.
So pulling all these threads together from the sources, what are the main lessons here from China's journey, especially for other countries?
Well, for high-income countries like the European nations, mentioned in one source, market size really matters. That fragmented European market can make it harder to scale innovations commercially compared to China's huge unified one.
Limits the speed, maybe?
Limits the speed and ease of scaling, yeah. And policy obviously matters hugely. Fostering entrepreneurship, allowing room for experiments seems key. One source even provocatively suggests maybe some early limited protectionism.
Citing historical examples like the UK, US, Japan, South Korea.
Right. Suggesting that might have helped them nurture their own tech giants, maybe contrasting with how foreign tech giants dominate some sectors in Europe now.
And it contrasts that with a perceived Chinese approach in some areas. Innovate first, see what happens, then regulate if needed, using that P2P software example.
It's definitely a different approach to risk and regulation. But maybe the most universal lesson highlighted across the sources is human capital.
Education, university research.
Yeah. Investing in people and fundamental research is presented as the ultimate long-term driver for any economy wanting to innovate.
Okay, and what about for lower income countries? What are the takeaways?
Speed seems to be the main message there. Absorb technology from advanced economies as fast as you can. FDI, collaboration, just adopting best practices. It's the quickest path to build capability initially.
Before maybe your own domestic innovation can really take off, and creating a genuinely good business environment seems critical too.
Absolutely. Avoiding misallocating resources, making it easy to do business, and strategically allocating resources towards innovation and R&D, even if it means less immediate consumption.
And the academic source backs that up, right? Saying deliberate government strategy can speed up that R&D catch-up.
It definitely suggests that targeted policy can make a real difference there.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear China's transformation is, well, it's way more complex than just tech stats, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's this multifaceted journey involving deliberate strategy, powerful market forces, massive state investment, evolving leadership, cultural shifts, even social change.
It's a really dynamic picture. It shows how combining learning from others, creating space for new ideas, and strategically directing resources, both money and people, can drive enormous change.
And as the sources show, the insights here aren't just about China. They really do have relevance for economies at all sorts of different stages.
Totally. Whether it's the power of market scale, the impact of specific government policies, the absolute importance of human capital, or even cultural adaptability. The ideas we've explored challenge those simple narratives, you know?
Yeah. And what's really fascinating here, I think this deep dive leaves you wondering, if innovation is this complex weave of tech, society, culture, leadership,
Right.
what other engines of innovation might be shaping the world right now that we aren't fully seeing?
Right. What aspects of identity or cultural heritage in other regions are just waiting to be unlocked to drive new kinds of progress?
It's a great question to chew on.
Exactly. It makes you look beyond just the usual suspects. And thinking about the themes today, leadership, identity, innovation, especially in that Asian-European context, there are definitely more avenues to explore.
For sure. Based on these sources, you could easily imagine a follow-up dive focusing specifically on those China-Germany partnerships in green and digital tech. Really unpack those examples.
Or you could compare state strategies more directly. The state's hand in innovation, comparing China's approach, the R&D drivers we talked about, with European policies and outcomes.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Or lean more into the human side, culture, leadership, and the human engine of innovation. Looking at lessons from Asia, perhaps, for European identity and progress, focusing on those cultural, social, and human capital themes.
Those all feel like really natural next steps building on what these sources offered.
Well,
Thanks for bringing this fascinating material for us to explore today.
my pleasure.
We really hope you found this deep dive insightful.